Welcome to Horizons of Thought. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the Jane Elliott experiment and how New Zealand and many other countries accidentally reenacted this experiment on a national scale. These unintended experiments are still ongoing here in New Zealand. Let me begin by explaining what the Elliott experiment was. On the night of April 4th, 1968, Jane Elliott turned on her television to learn of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. That night, she planned to combine a lesson about Native Americans and her previously planned discussion of Martin Luther King Jr. for a Hero of the Month project. In that moment, she thought of what she believed was a Sioux prayer: "O Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I have walked in his moccasins." So Jane Elliott wanted her all-white students to have an idea of what it was like to be black in the United States. She went into her classroom. She waited until everyone arrived and then asked all the children what they thought it felt like to be a black person in the United States. The children talked about how black people get treated as though they are stupid, get called cruel names, and don't get the same benefits from society as white people. Jane Elliott then asked the class if they could understand what that felt like, and quickly suggested that they would not be able to know unless they experienced it for themselves. She then offered that experience to them. The children agreed with a chorus of "yeah." Jane Elliott then very overtly told them she was going to enact discrimination based on the color of their eyes instead of their skin, as all the children were white. In the original version, she started with having the brown-eyed children be called superior to the blue-eyed children. However, it is the opposite order in the documentary I cite, so we'll stick with the documentary's order. To begin with, the kids resisted, but eventually they got into it. She reinforced the idea of blue-eyed superiority by segregating the newly inferior brown-eyed people. She gave them less recess time and insisted it be indoors. She forced brown-eyed kids to not use the drinking fountains, but instead little paper cups. She ordered all the kids to play only with children of their own eye color. She also gave the brown-eyed children collars to make them easier to identify. She then belittled the brown-eyed kids for their newfound slowness at tasks. As time went on, blue-eyed kids suggested using a yardstick to keep the brown-eyed kids in line. At lunch, she had the blue-eyed kids go first, and only they could go back for seconds. The blue-eyed kids justified this on the basis that the brown-eyed kids were not as smart, a claim that they had only heard for the first time that morning. The brown-eyed kids talked about how they felt bad for their mistreatment, and under those conditions, they did not want to try to work hard at school. The brown-eyed kids were upset because the teacher was taking their friends away. By afternoon recess, the kids were already enacting violence and hurling insults on each other. Brown-eyed became a negative racial epithet. Within a space of 15 minutes, the teacher had seen kids go from cooperative to nasty, vicious, and discriminatory. The brown-eyed kids did worse on tests than the blue-eyed kids within the span of half a day. The next day, she switched it up, saying that actually she lied the day before, and brown-eyed children were actually the ones superior to the blue-eyed kids. She accomplished this by finding specific examples of bad behavior of the blue-eyed kids, and then having the brown-eyed kids put the discriminatory collars on the blue-eyed kids. She then spent the day praising the brown-eyed children for everything vaguely good they did, and criticizing the blue-eyed children for everything vaguely bad they did. Despite the absurdity of it all, she still managed to get a swap of the discriminatory effect. Not quite as strong, but she still got it. She could alter kids' speed at certain tests by as much as 2 times in the span of 1 day, making the children who were discriminated against move much more slowly than the superior kids. Jane Elliott straight up told the children what she was doing while she was doing it, and it still worked. Now, at the end of her class, she got the kids to discuss what it felt like to go through this experiment and to understand the harm that segregation and discrimination cause. Here in New Zealand, this experiment has been enacted on a national level with children. You see, We spent months telling the whole society that the Auckland COVID lockdowns were necessary because not enough people had taken the COVID vaccine. Despite over 90% of our country taking the vaccine, those lockdowns were only lifted when we implemented a vaccine pass system that allowed only the vaccinated people to access restaurants, hairdressers, and an assortment of other public events. And we implemented this not just with adults who can freely make their own choices, but with 12-year-old children. We have divided the nation between COVID-vaccinated 12-year-olds and unvaccinated 12-year-olds. We segregated the unvaccinated 12-year-olds, giving them fewer benefits of being in our society. We denied them access to hairdressers. We denied them access to restaurants with their friends and family. In many cases, we denied them access to organized sport. In a few cases, we fired their parents from jobs, so we made them collectively poorer. Only now, with a recent high court case overturning vaccine mandates for military and police, will some people be getting their jobs back. But unlike the Jane Elliott case, we haven't stopped the whole experiment. We haven't swapped the kids who are being discriminated against. We have not in any way discussed the evils of this discrimination. Now, as you know from previous recordings, I am vaccinated against COVID-19, and I have recently even had a booster. I'm not writing this as an opposition to the vaccine itself, but I certainly am opposed to the vaccine mandates here in New Zealand. And this is most definitely one of the reasons for my opposition. The extent of damage done to children in New Zealand is not yet known, but there is a court case designed to prevent the government from extending this policy down to 5-year-olds. In that court case, there will be plenty of evidence provided to show the extent of the social damage created by implementing a vaccine pass system on children. If I am to believe the results of the 50 years of replication of the Jane Elliott experiments that Jane Elliott herself has conducted, then this experiment has been devastating. We can be sure that unvaccinated children have received verbal abuse, physical violence, and are doing worse on tests in school than their vaccinated counterparts. Absolutely sure. This has been Horizons of Thought. Hope to see you in a couple of weeks when I discuss the notion of the shadow and the collective unconscious in relation to world events today. If you like this video, click like, subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell for notifications. You can also sponsor the channel through the donor box link below.